Wow, it looks even better than the photos.
It looks expensive. They always talk about how we're best friends. Best friends do this, best friends do that, but I don't want to be best friends, Jill.
You don't like me?
No. The problem is I like you too much. I fell in love with you the first time I laid eyes on you. I was hoping you felt the same.
Talk to me. Help me understand you.
I remember the first time I met Taylor. It was after class in the hallway. Like a cheesy rom-com, I dropped my books and no one noticed. I was invisible. But then I look up, someone is helping me. She was beautiful. I even remember her smell, like lavender. How could I forget? A fire was lit in me. She was all I could think about. All I wanted was to spend every waking moment with her. And in a way, my dreams came true.
Happy February. And yes, this story lands squarely at the intersection of Black History Month, queer visibility, and women-centered emotional truth. What unfolds in this first film of the quartet is not a spectacle-driven romance, but a quiet, devastatingly familiar portrait of how intimacy between women often begins in invisibility and grows in the margins, shaped as much by what is unsaid as by what is finally spoken. And the film wisely frames Holly and Taylor's connection not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow accretion of recognition, safety, and deferred honesty that many queer women, particularly Black queer women, will recognize as painfully real. The narrative opens with Holly's voice recalling the moment of first contact, a hallway encounter so mundane it borders on cliché, yet the film immediately reframes that cliché through a queer lens. Holly is invisible not because she lacks presence, but because she exists in a social space that has not been trained to see her. A Black woman whose inwardness and intellectual seriousness place her outside the corridors of desirability as it is typically constructed. And when her books spill to the floor and no one stops, the film quietly situates us in a world that routinely overlooks women like her. Taylor's entrance, then, is not merely romantic but interruptive, an act of seeing that registers as transformative precisely because it is so rare. And Holly's sensory memory, lavender, warmth, attention, underscores how queer desire often begins as an embodied shock rather than a conceptual realization, something felt long before it is named. Their initial conversation is gentle, almost cautious, and the film resists grand declarations in favor of mutual curiosity. Taylor's admiration for Holly's intellect, her request for help framed awkwardly yet sincerely, and Holly's immediate refusal of transactional boundaries all establish a relationship grounded in equality rather than extraction, which matters deeply in a cultural landscape where queer women, especially those racialized as nurturing or dependable, are often positioned as resources rather than partners. As they begin studying together night after night, the film lingers not on montage romance but on routine, repetition, and proximity, signaling that for many queer women intimacy is built not through dramatic gestures but through shared time and emotional reliability. And Holly's confession that she has been taken advantage of by pretty girls in the past introduces an underexplored but crucial theme: the vulnerability of queer women who have learned to equate attention with affection, and the careful discernment required to trust that someone's interest is not merely flattering but reciprocal and respectful. What makes this connection feel different, the film suggests, is not the absence of power dynamics but their conscious navigation. Taylor really seeing Holly is less about romance than about recognition, a form of validation that queer women are often denied both within and outside straight culture. And this recognition becomes the emotional glue that binds them long before either woman is willing to interrogate its implications. When Taylor moves in, the story enters a familiar yet under-discussed queer territory: cohabitation that masquerades as practicality while quietly deepening emotional dependence. A dynamic that many women, queer or not, will recognize as both comforting and destabilizing, especially when societal scripts do not offer clear language for what such closeness means outside heterosexual frameworks. The film does not villainize Taylor for dating others, nor does it romanticize Holly's pain. Instead, it situates both women within a culture that encourages women to minimize their needs, to swallow discomfort for the sake of harmony, and to treat emotional labor as a private burden rather than a shared responsibility. Holly's heartbreak is rendered through absence and aftermath. The night Taylor does not come home, the morning after confessions that feel like small erasures. And this choice reflects how queer longing is often experienced not as overt rejection, but as a series of quiet exclusions, moments where one realizes they occupy a different emotional register than the person they love. Taylor's subsequent silence, her decision to stop sharing details and even to lie, is not framed as cruelty but as confusion, an attempt to manage a dissonance she has not yet learned how to name. And the film is careful here to avoid the trope of the oblivious straight best friend by allowing Taylor self-awareness without immediate clarity. She senses the imbalance, feels guilt, resentment, and discomfort, and her monologue during their pivotal conversation becomes the emotional fulcrum of the film, articulating a truth many queer women have heard or spoken in fragments but rarely seen honored in full. When Taylor admits that her guilt has curdled into resentment, that she wants the freedom to date and experiment without feeling like she is betraying someone simply by living her life, the film acknowledges a real tension within queer narratives. The fear of being perceived as possessive or limiting simply for having feelings, a fear that often pressures queer women to silence themselves in order to appear chill, mature, or undeserving of care. Yet the conversation does not end there, and this is where the film quietly challenges dominant narratives, because Taylor's honesty leads not to distance but to clarity. Her realization that her discomfort during a recent hookup was not guilt, but misalignment reframes desire as something that resists repression, that asserts itself even when one is trying to perform normalcy. And her admission that she wants Holly not out of obligation but out of choice dismantles the idea that queer love is merely a consolation or a fallback. The kiss, when it finally arrives, is treated not as spectacle but as release, and the film's restraint here is both political and intimate. By focusing on breath, hesitation, and mutual consent, it aligns queer desire with emotional truth rather than erotic excess, countering a long history of lesbian representation filtered through voyeuristic or male-centered gazes. For queer women watching, especially those who came of age in environments where same-gender desire was either invisible or hypersexualized, this moment resonates as an affirmation that intimacy can be soft, uncertain, and deeply human. And for women more broadly, it mirrors the experience of realizing that one's deepest connection may not fit the roles one has been taught to prioritize. The film's emotional power lies not in novelty, but in recognition, in its understanding that becoming visible often requires unlearning the instinct to justify one's feelings. And Holly's quiet endurance, her willingness to listen, to wait, to absorb pain without demanding reassurance, reflects a broader social pattern in which women are expected to be emotionally accommodating even when their own needs are unmet. By allowing Taylor to articulate her fear of hurting Holly while also acknowledging her own repression, the film avoids simplistic binaries of victim and perpetrator, instead presenting queer awakening as a relational process that unfolds unevenly, shaped by fear, desire, and the scarcity of models for what loving another woman can look like without apology. The discomfort society feels when witnessing women love women is threaded through this story not as external conflict but as internalized hesitation. The pauses, the the aborted sentences that mark the space between feeling and saying, and this discomfort persists today because women's desire, especially when detached from male validation, still destabilizes cultural norms that rely on women's emotional labor being directed outward rather than inward or toward each other. In centering Black women, the film adds another layer of significance, reminding viewers that Black queer love has often been erased or flattened, either ignored entirely or framed through trauma alone. And here the narrative insists on tenderness, intellectual connection, and mutual care as acts of quiet resistance. Holly and Taylor's story is not about forbidden love or dramatic transgression. It is about the courage it takes to stop minimizing oneself, to name what has always been there, and to risk the vulnerability of being fully seen. And in doing so, the film offers queer women and all women a mirror that reflects not fantasy but truth, that love often begins long before we have permission to claim it, that safety is the soil from which desire grows, and that becoming visible is less about announcement than about choosing, again and again, to honor what we feel even when the world has taught us to look away.